Hey there. How are you? How are you? How are you? This is NJ Evans, and this is the evening drive home. I'm coming by just for a moment to have a brief conversation with you, and I mean truly brief. Of course, I know that you're aware of the fact that the March 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th has brought in these new things to us here on this planet known as Earth. And these things are now going to have an impact on us, whether we believe it or not. That's very relevant at this time. But what is not irrelevant is the fact that we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to who we are, where we're going, and not to be fearful. And that is basically the direction of what I wanted to share with you. I just stopped by, as I said a minute ago, to just share some historical events. Now, remember, if this didn't have any kind of relevancy, if this doesn't mean anything, what's happening within these next few days, then why are everybody, why is the general public on all the social medias talking about the transition, the transformation, and all the things that have taken place, and planets that have appeared in the sky that have never been there before, or have not been there in 1,000 years, or have not been there in 200 years? All of these things really, they mean something. Now, exactly how much high science we want to do in it, that's another thing. But how is it impacting us? I think one of the things we need to do is pay attention to the science around us. Case in point, I started paying a lot of attention to the educational system, besides the fact that we don't rank very high across the world. I'm talking about the United States. Across the world, okay? I think South Korea is number one. I think we're coming in at like about 31, something like this. I have those stats because I'm going to be doing a live webinar and I'm going to be talking about that type of stuff at the end of this month. And I really would like you to come. But back to the story. These particular times, it seems like to me, you wouldn't close schools, but there are a lot of cities and states that are closing their schools. And I would tend to think more than likely it's the more disenfranchised communities that are being subject to such a move or such an action, as opposed to those who might be more on the affluent side. So one group is going to be the worker bees, and the other group is going to be those in charge. That's one way of looking at it. So how do we get in front of this game? How do we play it so that we can really start winning some kudos, you could say? Is there anyone in your community who really looks after the single women who, I'm talking about adult males, adult females, older women who are really protective of the child and the mother who's working 1,000 hours in order to survive? If you see such a scenario and you live in that particular community and you can be altruistic and you can be in your heart pure, and I'm talking about somebody who's going to be a predator. I'm talking about somebody who's going to sincerely help, not because he thinks the mom is a good looking woman or he might have a fetish for little children. No, 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 no. I'm talking about somebody who's straight, has their mind tuned into the kinds of things that are happening around the world, and also tuned into the fact that their community is, it might be a nucleus, it might be very small, but the thing about it is that it's relevant. I heard one community, I will refrain from mentioning which city and state, but anyway, one community had 1,000 schools that closed. I was thinking, 1,000? Where are those kids going? And what happens to the situation where the parent happens to be one parent, a male or a female, or a grandparent? What happens now? What happens? Because that child will be in the house 24/7. What happens? How do you entertain that child? This is a child that we're talking about. Grade, what do you call that? Elementary school grade, junior high school, and high school children. They were disenfranchised, you could say. So let's look at the libraries. Do they have a library in that community where they can go to maybe for a couple of hours and become engulfed in the internet, and not just any old thing on the internet, doing something that's a little more productive, trying to pick it up from where we left off at. Once upon a time, the parents used to be involved with educating their children. Once upon a time. And education was very paramount in our world. But apparently, we have lost sight of some of those things. And we have become accustomed to let somebody else do it, like the teachers. And now it would behoove us not to do this, but it appears that AI is now taking a position of you are going to be the one that's going to be in charge of helping to tutor educate the child. That just might not be a good idea. Just might not be a good idea. So what does the child do with their mind? Do they just sit there and vegetate? What happens to the dreams and the explorations? What happens to all of those kinds of things? They just vegetate? They do nothing? So I think what I like to do is just bring a focus on something. Now, I am what you call dyslexic. Now, dyslexia are people that have an array of challenges, so people think. But I think the piece that they're missing is it's not a mental disability. All right. It's a learning disability. And I wonder if it's really a learning disability or that's the label that we're placing on it, because we have not figured out exactly how to identify and know the reasons why a child can read from right to left as fluently as they can read from left to right. Now, which way do you read from? Right to left or left to right? All right. Same thing with the numbers and same thing with the letters. But if you look into certain languages, there are languages that read from right to left. And they must be having a heck of a challenge trying to understand why we are reading from right to left, especially since they've been doing theirs from right to left. And we are doing ours from left to right, but they are doing theirs that way for maybe hundreds of years, maybe even longer. So in that particular culture, the child from this particular culture who is reading from right to left and is supposed to be reading from left to right is normal. But anyway, that's another discussion. The only reason why I present that is because that is not a reason to sit back on your laurels. If this is an opportunity for a child to learn how to really apply their skill sets, well, then apply the skill sets. From 0 until 9 years old, that's a very important time in a child's life because that's your mental development. And I'm not on that level, but my mother was. So all of that information was filtered down to me whether I wanted it or not. So she would just explain it because she was a certified social worker in mental health. And then I have other friends and family members that are involved in that area. So I paid attention to it. But the main thing that I paid attention to as a baby boomer, we did not have labels like that. And especially if you attended any of the schools, you had to know the work. Either you knew the work or you didn't. Either you could fudge it till you get to the next class or you didn't. However, once you got to the 4th grade or 3rd grade, your grades had to be whatever the average was. So if the average was 75, then you had to do 75. You wasn't going into the 4th grade on what they call probation. You had to hit it right on the head. Now, is that part of the reason why the school system closed down in these various areas? And I mean, this was before all the other excitement that came in. All right. I mean, before that, these areas was having challenges, and it was funding, and they were taking the funding from as I understand it, taking the funding from the public schools and giving it to the private schools, and so consequently, the chartered schools and other private schools were now being funded with monies because apparently, according to one piece that I read, there was not enough students in attendance in that particular community in order to justify sending money to that particular school. I thought this was outrageous. I said, this is kind of crazy here. But where were the parents? Where were the adults? Were they sitting at home or were they engaged in work and they were totally distracted and they didn't know what to do or how to do whatever it is that they wanted to do? And when you're sitting in that position, usually people do come and take advantage of the situation. So my proposal: anybody in your community who stays home on a 24/7, who's considered to be what you would say above board, a good person, a good person who will just make sure that none of the riffraff comes near the child on any level. And I know that there's a possibility with this because I met a gentleman many years ago, and he was from Ohio. As a matter of fact, to be quite honest, he was from Cleveland. And that was during a time when Cleveland was just as heavy and running rampant as the states that I came from. I came from New York. And so, what this gentleman had shared with me in California, which is where I was standing when I met him and engaged in the conversation, was that he was in that city on that particular day to participate in a grant, of not even a grant. He was submitting a proposal. That's what he was doing for his project that he had designed in Ohio to bring it to California. I found that to be extremely interesting. He wasn't bad to look at either, but he's extremely interesting. And the reason why I thought it was interesting because a guy from the hood, raised by the hood environment, and the men in his community was sort of like that movie, the one with Lawrence Fishburne and Cooper Goodings. Yeah, I can't remember the name of that movie, but anyway, it was similar to that, where they would the gentleman in the human excuse me, the gentleman inside that particular community was actually looking out for this young man and his mother. So when his mother was at work, or she had to work late because she worked two jobs, what they would do is they would congregate, get the little guy in the middle of that little pool, and everybody had a specific talent or area in this young man's development that they would handle. Case in point, math, reading, articulation, all those kinds of things. This was happening in the hood. So this gentleman had a certain kind of magnetism about himself because he had the I'm a bad boy thing going on, but he had the demeanor and intelligence of I'm a businessman. Now, where he went on in life, I have no idea. Did he become a narcissist? Only the universe knows. But the one thing that I do know is that in that moment in time, that picture, click, click, was that there were men in a community and women who was looking out for this single mother's child while she tried to better herself and her child's environment. And that young man decided to bring back to the community by creating a business. He graduated from the university. I mean, the guys brought him all the way through, okay? Graduated from the university, and he doubled back and he created a program to come into their area in order to help the disenfranchised in that community. My hat goes off to the gentleman, sincerely. How many people think about doing that? Now, why do I mention that? Because usually, if you're dyslexic, that's when they want to put you back in the third grade or the fourth grade. If they don't understand what is going on with you and you can't articulate it and you have nobody there to represent you because your mother and father might not be aware of what it is that you're experiencing because maybe their parents were experiencing the same thing, but nobody shared the information. We like secrecies. All right, nobody shared the information. So consequently, you might think it's, oh, well, he's just dumb, or she don't know what she's talking about. She's always out there daydreaming. Do you know one of the women that was considered to be a computer at NASA during the John Glenn's flight? She used to be a daydreamer, but she was a heck of a mathematician. And she was in college. I believe she was in college at about the ripe old age of about 10 years old. I don't know. It's called Hidden Figures. Look that up or watch the movie, whichever one, or listen to the audio, whichever one suits your fancy. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is because those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to think about. Back to my story about dyslexia. So I'm thinking that a lot of these young people who are in these low-income schools are being misdiagnosed. And I'm not saying that there's not ADD, ADHD, and all the rest of the alphabets involved. I'm focusing on one specific area, which is the dyslexia. And sometimes that can be misdiagnosed. Depends on how zealous, how enthusiastic the trainer, the teacher, the documentation, the funding, Depends on so many other outside particulars that can possibly cause a challenge for a child who doesn't know which way to go, and whose parent might be a young parent and doesn't even know that they can stand up for their own rights. So I'm inviting you guys to a free webinar end of March. I'll give you more insight into that as we get closer. And it's really primarily because I wanted to take a focus and say, okay, third and fourth grade, what's going on in the third and fourth grade while we have to stop the child at that time? So between 8 and 9 years old. What's going on between the sixth and the seventh grade that we want to try and stop the child there, 11 and 12 years old. Now, on a spiritual plane, those are two very pivotable years, very much so. And it's very important that we take a look at those years in connection with the education, and then also what's going on in terms of the environment, so that we can have a clearer understanding of what is the child dealing with. And check this out. That was before AI. So AI is here too. Now, the other piece that nobody else is talking about is the fact that dyslexic people think outside the box. So Richard Branson, there's so many, many, many people who have been diagnosed as dyslexic, but you wouldn't have known because they're multimillionaires or billionaires if they're allowed to use their gifts and their talents. Before I close this, I want to share this with you. The stories that I bring to you is sort of like a griot, because I figured if I tell it in a story form, you'll understand where I'm coming from or where I'm going. These are very, very important times. This is not a time to sit on the side and say, give me some popcorn, I'm going to watch this game. This is a game you want to participate in. This is a game that you want to feel that you can anchor your feet and you can get the information that you need for whatever it is that you think that you need it for. And if you have a legacy, and if you don't have any children and you have nieces and nephews, my dear, that's the legacy. You have to participate. And you have to learn how to do things like have strong self-esteem. Be confident enough in who you are that you stand up and you speak for yourself. And if you don't know the topic, well, then research it. The library is a very fascinating place once you learn how to use it correctly. It doesn't mean that everything in there is true to help you God, but it does mean at least it'll send you on a direction. And then you can also use that same tool, that lovely, lovely laptop or that lovely, lovely desktop. And you can use that in order to find more information that is global. The other day, I was looking through something. As a matter of fact, it's called UNESCO. And I was looking at the educational status of different countries, especially third world, in quotation mark, especially Africa. And guess what I found out? Third grade and seventh grade was very important. The testing that they did was third grade and seventh grade. Same thing that we're doing here in this country. You need to look that up if you ever have that kind of interest. So that means we're going back to what I said a minute ago. Why the third grade and fourth grade? Why the seventh grade and eighth grade, or sixth grade and seventh grade? The only thing that I can think of is because at the age of 9, whoever you are is what everybody's going to get when you turn 14, 15. At the age of 12, if you have anything that's really dramatic that happens in your life, a death of a favorite friend, a death of a family member that you were close to, moving from a particular location to a new location and being ridiculed or abused by the numerous factors that can be involved there. Whatever goes on that really stops you or stuns your growth, you'll see it from that individual when they're between the ages of 16, 17, 18. Now you're going to see it in the 11th and 12th grade. If you want to stop somebody from really being productive, my theory, you probably would start the process in the third grade, fourth grade, see how it develops, seventh grade, eighth grade. You understand what I'm saying to you? And if you want that child to graduate from high school, and the thing about it is this, it could be anything. It doesn't mean that it's going to be all the outside people that are doing all of these things. It could be people that are right inside your own household who are doing these things to hinder the growth of this child. So, whoever you are, who's sitting there with a child that's in your presence and you have to be online in a few minutes because you have to go to work, and that child is 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and you put them on the internet, make sure you have somebody else there that's watching, or you have the tools in place so that you can monitor what kinds of things are coming through on the internet. It's not necessarily a good babysitter. And you're going to have to be very picky choosy because you're carrying a group of kids who asked to be born in this time period. Why? For the same reason that there are those who want them to be stopped, and that is they have a mission, just like you do. So the thing that I say to you is, who are you, and why do you have that little gem in your presence, in your possession, or why do you know of these gems, and what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to help them? And if you think you can't help them, well, why don't you learn how to? Remember to create the reality that you truly do desire, not one that you don't. My name is N.J. Evans, and I'll give you some more insight into my background. But in the meantime, it's been an honor and a pleasure spending this moment with you. And trust me, the 21 minutes is a moment. And I do hope that we have an opportunity to meet and greet and go in this direction again. What do you think? Think we can do that? I would love to be able to. Ciao.